Hi there, Ramon from Memories, and welcome to our next episode of Caregiver Insight. Today we have an amazing caregiver from New Jersey, and I'll toss it over to her to introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Katherine. I'm an occupational therapist, and I am a caregiver, part of a caregiver team for my grandmother, who we call Mema. She has dementia, and part of our caregiver team, it's at least 10 people wide. Sometimes it changes. It's me, my sister, my mom, her twin sister, her 3 kids, and also my dad. And we also have a very good family friend who's been her Mema's roommate for over 50 years now, who is living with us too, who also assists. She's actually 89 years old, so I don't know if that's a record for the oldest caregiver, but we have a really big team.
I think that's so amazing, and at least for our interviews, that's definitely the record for the oldest caregiver that we've ever heard about or discussed. I think it's so amazing that you have such a close-knit, dedicated team that's willing to looking after your mama. And I'd love to chat with you a little bit about what that team dynamic has been like for you in your caregiving experience so far.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting with a big team, but it's helpful in a lot of ways too.
For sure. So I guess my first question to you would be, how long have you been a caregiver, and kind of what was that experience in the early days of caregiving emotionally like for you?
So I kind of started informally in a way about when I was in grad school, actually. I guess it was about like 5 years ago. And I was living close to, Mama used to live in Manhattan in an apartment, and I lived close by to her. That was kind of when she started with her symptoms. So after classes, which was actually down the street from her apartment, I would go and I would like check in on her, and I would make sure that she got her exercise in, like just kind of like managing her appointments and looking into her money and stuff like that, and just like overall larger tasks around the house. So that really wasn't a burden at all. It was actually just like nice to check in on her. So early on it was pretty easy, but then as things went on, we actually had a unique situation. As many people with dementia, they do start to have some paranoia, and I feel like a lot of times it surrounds money. So she had some paranoia surrounding our family members and some money that she thought that someone had taken. Turns out she just paid her bills with it. But as some people who have family members with dementia know, that's a common theme amongst early mid-stage dementia. So we kind of had a little bit of a rift, and it was an emotional time because there was a lot of finger pointing, and that was definitely tough for us for a while. But then as she started to progress more, she kind of forgot about that, and we were able to, obviously put that behind us. And as she got worse and worse, we had to move her in with us, and then the pandemic happened. So we've all been together, and fortunately, we've been together this whole time, so we didn't really have a lot of one-on-one caregiving with her. We really shared the burden, so we didn't have a lot of like one person shouldering all of that. So I think after that one emotional period where it wasn't really the burden of caregiving, it was just kind of, I guess it is kind of the burden of caregiving for somebody with dementia, just dealing with the behavioral things that come along with dementia. But other than that, it's been really, I'm very fortunate. My family and I are very fortunate to be able to share the caregiving burden for Mema, because there's so many people that not one person is taking all of this burden and the responsibility for every day-to-day thing she has to do.
For sure. And I again, am super grateful for your family for having this large caregiving team. As you mentioned, it is a huge, can't even put into words how much of a huge burden relief that can be for spreading that out over multiple people.
Absolutely.
I guess my next question to you is, how do you think this caregiving experience has affected your family dynamic since you're spending so much time together? Has it drawn you closer? Do you guys argue? How has it overall affected your experience as a family?
It definitely has. But I wouldn't say we're spending necessarily more time together, because we've always been like, so we've always been very close. My aunt, who is also involved, that I mentioned earlier, she's my mom's twin. She lives down the street from us. So we eat dinner together. Even before this, we ate dinner together every night. Like, we're always all together. So I think definitely the dynamic has changed more in what we argue about, because we've definitely argued before, just spending so much time together all the time. But, you know, like, even though we all have different responsibilities, sometimes there are tasks that could kind of be up for grabs, or if somebody is away or they have things to do, and one person may take over their responsibility for them. So, for example, my aunt is responsible for showering Mama every night. If she had to, there was a time when she was sick, like in the beginning of COVID, she had gotten sick and she was quarantined for 3 weeks. So then it was just split amongst my household who was bathing Mama. And then for a while we were just rotating nights, but then there were certain days where somebody couldn't. And then if one person was taking over that responsibility, there was definitely some tension. So there's that. But a lot of other things, I wouldn't call it an argument, but sometimes there's frustrations with the way that we approach certain situations. Some people in the family, I call it quizzing. They like to talk to Mama and kind of, it seems kind of like a quiz in a way, because their way of talking to her is to try and like get her to remember certain events, to reminisce about certain things. But it comes off as a quiz. So I'm just trying to think of a particular example. So like, who, like showing a picture, who's this person? Who's this person? How old is this person? Who's so-and-so married to? And I have found, and a couple other family members, I found that just frustrates her. So it's a different way of connecting with her that we don't necessarily agree with. So I think it's more of different approaches where we don't necessarily argue over it, but there is some sort of frustrations that come with that.
For sure. And I think that touches on a really interesting point, that caregivers are so diverse in terms of how you want to approach. And I think it's awesome that for a large team like what you have a bunch of diverse approaches that are all super dedicated. But when certain people don't agree with certain approaches, it can lead to some tensions, some frustrations. So I guess my next question is, what strategies do you use as a family to kind of manage that, to kind of realize that what you're doing may be frustrating other caregivers? How do you as a team kind of stay grounded and connected to each other?
Yeah, so I think I have played a pretty big role in that because of my experience as an occupational therapist. So even from early on, I have kind of, I don't know if I'd call it training, but kind of guided my family members in certain approaches. And I'd say I'm a pretty patient person, and just having experience in caregiver training, I don't like to place blame or tell anyone they're doing anything wrong. So we just kind of have like open conversations and just explain our feelings. But I think that a lot of it, as a therapist, people do generally trust my opinion and my outlook on things. So that has been kind of helpful. I think I've played a little bit of a moderator role in some of these situations. But I think my family dynamic is such that even before this, like, we can openly talk to each other about our feelings, and it's like, no hard feelings about it. We just have to get our thoughts out there. And I think we're all pretty understanding.
For sure. And I think not even, this is such useful advice for people who may not even be in such as a large caregiving team, even 2 or 3 people. This idea of open communication and not assigning blame, and keeping in mind that you're all working towards the same goal. Because when you do get tensions, or when you do get frustrated and you may say things that you don't mean, or think things that you don't normally mean, it can be really easy to kind of fall into that. But just kind of remembering that the people that you're caregiving with have the same goal that you do. And if the approach isn't the exact same, you guys need to come to a consensus. Open communication. I think that's such a beautiful point to touch on. And I love that you brought up the fact that you're an occupational therapist. I think that's so cool. So if you maybe want to chat a little bit about how that kind of training and background has played a role in your caregiving experience, more so than you've already discussed.
Yeah, so just a little bit more background on my experience as an occupational therapist. I actually don't work with uh, older adults with dementia right now. I work with adults with developmental disabilities and also teenagers. So most of my caseload is diagnoses like Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, autism, Rett syndrome, other types of things. So there is a huge cognitive piece there. So that's been helpful. But I think definitely the biggest thing that has been helpful in my family and how my experience as a therapist has influenced everything is definitely the caregiver training aspect, if you want to call it, just how to approach certain situations. So just one example I can think of, MAMA has what's really common in a lot of older adults, whether or not they have dementia. We call it fear of falling. So she may not necessarily be at a risk physically for falling because she's actually very capable physically. She's still pretty strong. We go on walks with her every day, but sometimes she just gets really anxious about the fact that she's going to fall, that fear in itself could cause her to fall because she's just so afraid, and just ways to manage that. And most people who don't have an experience as a therapist would think of it like, oh, like, don't worry about it. You're not going to fall. It's fine. Like, just keep going. But you really have to treat that as a risk of falling in itself. So that's kind of prevented a lot of falls in my household with Mama, but just how to approach her and different suggestions that I've had. And definitely having a lot of people, it gets very overstimulating with the amount of noise and sights and people around. So that's been a big thing, just knowing and telling everybody like, okay, one person at a time, because that can overstimulate her, how to approach giving directions to Mama, and also how to maintain her independence as much as we can, because physically she can do a lot of things, but cognitively she really needs the support. So how to support her without necessarily doing things for her if she can do it. So that's kind of where I think it's been the most value in my training.
For sure. And I think that last point that you brought up is really interesting, this idea of supporting without almost like doing things for her. What sort of strategies do your family use, or do you tell your family to use, that kind of helps facilitate that feeling of independence for things that she can do?
Yeah, so it definitely depends on the situation, because sometimes if you're in a rush, it is easier to just do it for her. So we definitely I definitely appreciate that. And I know that that's something that has to happen. And when it does happen, it's totally fine. But some of the things that we do, like, for example, with bathing her, my aunt usually bathes her, but sometimes other people do. She can get into the shower herself. She really just needs like direct verbal directions. So, and then also while she's in the shower. So you don't necessarily have to shampoo her hair, because she has the range of motion in her arms where she can reach up. She just needs somebody to step back and give her the directions and like present them in a way that aren't confusing, so that she can do the steps herself and still maintain her her range of motion. So what we say in therapy, if you don't use it, you lose it. So if she's not having to reach up and wash her hair, the range of motion in her arms, she may not have to like have the strength after a while, but if someone's constantly doing it for her, she doesn't have to move her arms that way. So physically, she may lose her capabilities when she still has them. So just trying to keep the directions verbal but simple. Being patient is definitely something that I recommend and we talk about in our family. And giving her time to respond. So sometimes if you ask her a question or tell her to do something, if you want to call it a command, she needs time to process that. So if you just repeat the same direction over and over again, or ask her something else, that'll just distract her. So just patience, I think, is the biggest thing too.
Sure. And I love all those points. I think it's in a way it's almost easier to kind of not be patient, to just do things for her, because it's faster. But I love this idea of if you don't use it, you lose it. And I think it's important that caregivers kind of remind themselves of these things, because what's fastest and easiest may not always be what's best for you or for your loved one. Um, I'd love to chat with you a bit about some of the challenging parts of being a caregiver. I know you mentioned that there is a burden relief because it's being spread out over such a large team, but the burden is still there nonetheless. So I'd love to chat with you about like some things that like maybe the 2 or 3 things, or even the number one thing that you think is the hardest part about being a caregiver for your situation.
Definitely and I think this is something that a lot of people resonates with a lot of people when caregiving for someone with dementia, just the emotional aspect of seeing your loved one forget, especially memories or experiences that you hold dear to you. So I'm just trying to think of a particular example. So or people. So a lot of times my grandmother, she'll like be in and out. She's in the mid stages of dementia, but some days she's clearer than others. So some days she will think that my uncle who lives further away and she doesn't see so often, she'll think he's her brother. So I know that for him, that's definitely an emotional and hurtful experience. And of course, it's not her fault at all. And he does kind of look like my great uncle, her brother that she thinks he is some of the times. But just like seeing her not be able to recognize her son as her son, or things like that. But also, I think another really tough one for us managing that kind of goes hand in hand with that is forgetting when she forgets that her parents have passed away. So just managing that, and without telling her, they're no longer with us, because that will kind of put her through the whole grieving experience again. The way that our family has dealt with that is just kind of, in her reality, her parents are still alive. So we kind of validate that without really talking about it too much. So she'll ask for her mom a lot, and we'll say, oh, she's with your dad, which technically isn't a lie, because they are buried together. But she'll say, oh, well, where are they? And then we just say in Manhattan, and because that's where they used to live together. And she will say something like, oh, okay, well, like, why won't they come visit me? So we usually just say like, oh, well, your dad was a homebody. Like, he didn't like to go out all the time. And just like, then we start to use that as a tool to start reminiscing about like her parents and their relationship, so that we don't have to kind of hit her with this brick wall of your parents are dead. And that's something that she would have to reface. Like, in her reality, they're still alive at that moment. And just like coming to the fact that they're not there would be very traumatizing. We just kind of turn it into a reminiscence experience without, making it a really tough thing for her to deal with. But it's still, even though we've kind of come up with a system of how to deal with these situations, it still doesn't make it any easier every time that conversation comes up.
For sure. And I think that's a super interesting perspective. And I think that's a strategy that a lot of people can use, almost not lying, but just trying to shift the conversation in a different direction that can be positive. So like reminiscing. And I'd love to chat a bit about how, like, for those really difficult emotional experiences for your family, how do you support one another?
We kind of just like, we have like these open conversations. This is definitely something that's a theme in my family, and I think has been really helpful. We just are very open with each other. And, one of the things with dementia is, especially this stage where her short-term memory is pretty impaired at this point. If we get it wrong this time, it's next time we'll fix it. So like, she does have that memory lapse that like, okay, well, let's say somebody said something and it kind of like somebody responded to her in a way that kind of set her off or upset her in a way. If we give her that chance to let the memory lapse, and then next time we just talk about it, and we try not to place blame on each other. I think that's the biggest thing, but just having open conversations about it, and um, giving each other different things that may have worked in a conversation. Like, so if I had a conversation with her and nobody else was there, and something I said worked, or my sister or somebody else, we share that response that we gave her with each other, and so that we can just use those different strategies that worked.
For sure, for sure. And I love this idea of open communication. I think it's super important, especially when you have a caregiving team who have diverse approaches to caregiving, and this idea of sharing strategies so things that are successful can continue to be successful. I know you mentioned that this first kind of came about when you were in graduate school for occupational therapy. And that's still like a really, really young age, like early to mid 20s. So I guess kind of going through an experience like this, how do you think it's caused you to kind of grow as a person or change your outlook, having to go through an experience like this pretty early in your life?
It's definitely made me appreciate things a lot more, and um, try to make rich experiences. But I think it also, like, one, as a person, it's helped me, and just like it strengthened my relationship with my family, I think, which is really important to me. But I think it also, in my career as a therapist, it has helped me a lot, because it helps me to be able to relate to the caregiver experience that, like, I used to be in a skilled nursing facility, and I would work with some patients who did have dementia. At that time, like, it was still pretty early on, but I could relate to them. But even now, I work with adults with developmental disabilities, and relating to their caregiver experience, although it's different, like, just being able to relate in some way has kind of made me a stronger therapist in my career, because I can better give advice, and I know what's feasible and what's not, for the most part. So I think that both in my personal life, it's strengthened my family bond, but it's also made me a better therapist.
For sure, for sure. And I love this. I love this kind of positive outlook that you have in terms of kind of seeing how you as a person have grown both personally and professionally from the experience. I think it can be really challenging to kind of identify that because of the difficulty of what you're going through. But I think it's important for caregivers to kind of look back and see how they're changing and growing, because a lot of times it's for the better, whether it be more patience, whether it be better able to understand, whether it's being more appreciative. I think this experience, while challenging, can cause a lot of really positive personal growth, even though it is a very hard, difficult, negative experience. Um, I'd, I'd love to chat with you a little bit about social media, because I know you're super active on there, and kind of what role it's played in your caregiving journey.
Yeah, so I actually decided to make an Instagram page, kind of surrounding this caregiver experience, and throwing in my occupational therapy background, because I do have some other family members, and just like really close family friends that do live further away. So it was a way for them to kind of see the daily, day-to-day life experiences, and like pictures, and different, I guess, stories that we have with Mama, but also as a way to log this, so that I can look back, because eventually, when she does pass away, this is something that will still be there, and I could look back at, like, kind of like a digital footprint of different memories we had together. But then also, I wanted to be able to share my unique experience, because this is something that I deal with professionally and also personally. So putting that experience out there, just so that, I was thinking particularly when that situation with the when Mema would remember or not remember that her parents had passed away. I know that's something that a lot of people with who caregive for so I actually started the Instagram page because I wanted to share the caregiving experience, my unique caregiving experience that's personal with my family, in that we do have a group caregiver experience, but also my background as an occupational therapist, and how these two parts of my life kind of are interwoven, and just to kind of share my experience with other people, also to share with my other family members what's going on, who may live further away. They all follow the page, so I just have pictures and different stories of different events in Mema's day-to-day life. It's also like a great digital footprint because when she eventually does pass away, this is something that'll still be there, and I can look back on all these different memories we had and how we kind of grew through this. But then some people aren't as fortunate as I am and my family to have such a great group to share the caregiver burden with. So we're lucky enough that we can exchange strategies and different approaches that have worked, but people who are the sole caregiver of someone with dementia may not have that, and they may have no one to talk to. So just having something that they can, relate to, if they can use any of the strategies that I mentioned or any of the tips. I've been trying to get into a tip of the day, either if it's a tip for the caregiver and how to, help themselves, or a tip for more geared towards the person with dementia, just trying to be as helpful and sharing as much of my experience as I can.
Awesome. And I think that's super important. I love this idea of one, feeling connected to your family who may not live far away, and a digital diary almost for you of the experience. But I love this idea of kind of connecting with other people and sharing advice and expertise and helping be a part of the online caregiving community, which is something that we at Memories are super passionate about. Thank you so much for chatting with us today, Katherine. It was super great hearing your perspective. If anyone wants to kind of reach out to you to learn more about your experience or learn more about your tips from kind of an occupational therapist perspective, where can they find you?
So my Instagram page is Mema's Memories OT. You could also reach me at my email address, which is linked on the Instagram page, but that's KONEILL.OTR@gmail.com, and I'm happy to connect. I have had Zoom sessions with some other people, and just sometimes it's nice to talk to somebody who shares the experience that you have, even if it's a little different. So I'm happy to connect with anybody and just make some new connections with everyone.
Awesome. So we'll definitely have her Instagram page linked below as well as her email. So please reach out to her. Amazing, kind person, and amazing family as well. And please get to know each other, share your experiences, be a part of this online community that we're trying to build. Thank you so much again for chatting with us, Katherine.
Thank you for having me.
And stay tuned next week for our next episode of Memories Caregiving.